So welcome. Before Megan and I officially welcome you, we are going to take a look a little bit at these two questions that we've put up on the Slido poll, which you can get to either from the link in the chat or if you go to slido.com ESIP bridges. So today we're going to be setting aside some of our time to think about collaborations, how to make them stronger, how to make them work. So let's see if we can look at some of your responses about what made good collaborations in your experience and some of your favorite tools and resources for collaboration. Okay, somebody please just say something if it doesn't seem to be presenting, but let's go to the first one. Okay, so think of a positive collaboration between people or groups in your own experience. What made it a good collaboration? So mutual curiosity, that's a good one. Openness, things that we've heard throughout the ESIP meeting and ESIP community discussions. Again, mutual, not one collaborating into the other. There's some examples, which is great, of some of the good collaborations. Clear goals, commitment, friendly frankness. Do you think we're good at that, Megan? That's a good one.
It's a good one. I like the alliteration.
Okay, so again, communication, being open, sharing values and purpose.
Transparency.
And energy and enthusiasm, that's also great. Maybe we'll keep, I mean, this is going to be open the whole time. So if we want to take a look at it again later or just like toggle, I think once you answer, usually you can see what the poll results are as well. So
seems like there's no shortage of thoughts on this topic.
All right, so what's the next question? Favorite tools and resources for collaboration. There's a good one right here, coffee. Why does everyone have to make jokes? That's okay. Megan, do you see some things that
Leslie, that's a perfectly reasonable answer. Coffee is an incredibly important part of our collaboration. So I like how this is a good list of both technical tools and other tactics, conferences, in between spaces for natural conversation. We're firm believers in that. Miro, Google Docs. Yeah, there are a lot of tools for collaborating.
Yes, and then interestingly, many of these tools may not have been around when some of us started our careers in data and science and were in school. Some of these are, you know, it's always changing, but
yes, we're always adapting. I would say there's no perfect solution though. I think everybody has their preferences and in that sense. But coffee or beverage of choice, as Bruce has put in the chat box.
Coffee and talking, aided
yes.
by these other technical solutions. Okay, so I will move back to the slides then, Megan.
Yes, that's a wonderful thing to do.
Well,
yes, welcome. Leslie and I both want to welcome you to this session on building stronger bridges between collaborations. We both have an interest in this because of our respective roles, and we've both taken on the roles that we have because of our interest in building bridges like this and making these bridges stronger and learning how collaborations start and how they are maintained. I'll just quickly introduce myself. If we haven't met, my name is Megan Carter. I'm ESIP's community director. I have the pleasure of working with ESIP's 30 plus themed collaboration areas on many different topics. I'm always amazed by what they do together and how they push each other to collaborate in new and exciting ways. And Leslie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks. Hi, I'm Leslie Shee. I'm at the U.S. Geological Survey, and I'm kind of have an analogous position to Megan, but at the USGS Community for Data Integration, which is another community of practice that we have participating here today.
on
All right,
mute.
Megan.
I'm having some screen management problems. All right, so why are we here today? As community managers, like I mentioned, we're interested in making connections, and we've seen a growing desire in our respective communities for people to collaborate, but also to collaborate especially across boundaries, be they topical or organizational. And we recognize that it's not always easy to start or to maintain a collaboration. We're all limited by the time and resources that we have. The specific goals for today that we have are to connect related ESIP and USGS community for data integration efforts, specifically in the area of risk, resilience, and disasters. We guess that these are groups who might want to collaborate, or at the very least keep track of what's going on in these respective groups. We also want to take a broader look at how cross-group connections are formed and how they're sustained. And we'll speak to somebody, Lindsay Barbieri, who's specifically working on this right now in ESIP to see what her insights have been so far. We also want to think about how we can map and leverage the connections that we find today, or connections that we find in the future, of course. The hard part might not be identifying the connections, but actually taking steps toward kind of remembering them and leveraging them. And of course, the part about this session we can't force or anticipate is that, we hope you'll find things you're excited about, things you'll want to follow up on. And we tried not to over-engineer it because we want there to be serendipitous connections that we as community managers, we never see them coming, but we hope that that they'll result in that you will find them in this session. So moving on.
Before I go to the next slide, I'll just say, Megan, that we have seen that there have been plenty of other sessions within this meeting, January meeting at ESIP, who have also had these goals, which is great. They're moving ahead and trying to make those connections.
Beautiful. So we've asked the speakers to speak briefly about themselves today and the groups that they represent. And I'll be really transparent and say, we've asked them to talk about the group that they work with, examples of what the group has done, sort of what spheres or what groups do they already work with, what they personally do, because we're tapping into a variety of people who don't just represent the group they're telling you about today. And we want to make sure that they can share with you the other things that are important to them. We've also asked them to share a need that they have and a question that they have for other groups to get us thinking about how we might want to collaborate. And I would say, I don't know if I meant to mention this elsewhere, but Leslie and I very intentionally set this up so that this would be early career folks and ESIP community fellows talking to each other. There are many people involved in these groups, and we recognize that the perspective that each of you bring is unique and very important. And sometimes I see some of the biggest contributions coming from you all. So I'm really glad to be able to feature you today. And as this slide tells you, we want to make sure to give you time for thinking about what you're hearing from these folks. We're going to have some pretty fast-paced discussion or talks from them. I think they each get about 5 minutes, more or less. But we'll try to have a couple minutes in between where we want you to be thinking about a few specific questions, and we'll show you those in a moment.
Like now?
Yes.
Okay. As you're watching these presentations, here's some things that we hope you can be thinking about. So if you have a piece of paper, you could jot it down, or if you're in our shared Google Notes doc, we have places there where you can jot down notes to share with others. And a major part of this session, as Megan mentioned, is just like putting aside time to think about these things that we usually don't have time for during the whirlwind of meetings and everyday normal work life. So think about what connections do you possibly see to your own work from the activities of these groups? What connections do you see to other initiatives or efforts, either in this session or outside of it? What mechanisms did you identify for finding and sustaining connections between related groups or collaborations? And if you have any other questions, we also have room for that in our document. And we also have some questions from our speakers that we'll put in there that we can all reflect on after everyone speaks. Okay, Megan, are we ready to introduce our first speaker?
I believe so.
Okay, we're going to move on to our first speaker, Matt Georgonis. I will stop sharing right now so you can get your slides up, Matt. And Matt, you do have 10 minutes, so don't worry, we didn't change that on you. Matt Georgonis, he is a AAAS fellow that is working with the USGS Risk Community of Practice. And Matt, I look forward to hearing more about what you are doing.
All right. Thank you so much, Leslie. Can everyone see that all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the introduction and for the opportunity to present with the ESIP conference here today. And so today I'm going to be talking about the USGS Risk Research and Applications Community of Practice, which is sort of underneath CDI that Leslie talked about. But yeah, my name is Matthew Georgonis, and I am a AAAS, or American Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology Policy Fellow. I know it's a mouthful, but there you have it. And I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey in the Natural Hazard Mission Area. And so for this fellowship, I'm working to support the RISC COP and several other interagency spaces for disaster risk reduction as an environmental social scientist. That's my background. And so today I'm going to share a little bit of information about the RISC COP and some of our ongoing efforts, and also tie it in with a little bit about my background and where I'm coming from. And then I'll close with a question for the group. And so the RISC COP was actually formed after the USGS risk plan was published in 2018. So it was designed to help the USGS build capacity and sort of ensure that the USGS hazard information is delivered and incorporated into risk assessments and other products that can be used by decision makers. And within the plan, you can follow that link there, or I could share it at the end of the presentation, but there's 23 recommendations. There's also case studies in there, and creating the RISC COP was one of the recommendations, and that sort of came out of the plan. And so for this audience, the importance of the plan is that it emphasizes collaboration with partners from the beginning of research all the way through to product development and distributing those products to partners, decision makers, and communities that may need that information. And beyond the risk community of practice, it also outlines a few other efforts that we have underway that I'll share here. So I want to just share a few of our accomplishments from the last year. We finally reached over 200 community members. So we have monthly meetings that go out to those community members, and we have quite a bit of collaboration that happens within that space. And there's a lot of USGS employees, but also external collaborators from academia and local government. Another recommendation was creating a grant cycle. So we've completed 4 cycles of our smaller grants. We fund about 8 projects every year on risk research and applications. The 2020 projects are complete. We just did a mid-year check-in with fiscal year 21 projects, and those are scheduled to close around the end of March, maybe April, if you've got a little bit of a time extension. And right now I'm helping with fiscal year 22 proposals that will be due at the end of this month. And then we'll have a review panel next month to fund some of the research projects. And in this year specifically, we try to include more of a focus on equity and environmental justice and disaster reduction efforts, and a few other activities. We also have an annual meeting, and we had a workshop on equity and inclusion in risk reduction efforts. And to give a little bit more idea of the type of work we fund with this granting projects, as you can see, our current projects have a large range of activities, including volcanic lahar hazard product co-production by working with communities and local managers. We have one that's working on engaging tribal groups and mapping erosion impacts in the Southwest, assessing coastal vulnerability in Puerto Rico with local stakeholders, mapping invasive plant species moving into post-fire landscapes. And so we have representation across all of the USGS mission areas and science centers for a diversity of project goals. And probably by next summer, these FY21 projects will be closing out and sharing their final reports at Risk Community of Practice meetings. And to talk about my background and where I came from before joining the USGS. So I studied environmental social science at North Carolina State University, and my past research, broadly focuses on conservation issues, climate adaptation, community resilience in the United States and Mexico. And I always include a climate justice lens to document those community perspectives and what comes out of engagement and how we can improve planning processes, implementation, and even mitigate some of the unexpected impacts that come out of resilience programs or conservation programs that target people and communities. And for most of this work, I've been able to spend an extended amount of time in study site communities to build personal relationships and trust, to sort of get at the heart of those local challenges, to be able to document them in my research. So I've done a lot of qualitative work. And for example, my dissertation developed the Rural Coastal Community Resilience Framework, and through a lot of interviews and focus groups with local stakeholders, I was exploring some of the climate justice or challenges they have for adaptation and recovering from flooding events or hurricane events in North Carolina. And most recently, before joining the USGS, I was with the Nature Conservancy and the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research, where I evaluated EPA's Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And so I used a qualitative content analysis to look through their over 5,000 records of restoration projects to determine what the goals were and sort of outline the equity criteria that were in those project records. And then I followed that up with a survey to explore local manager perceptions of equity and success with either ecological or human well-being metrics. So now, as a AAAS fellow with the USGS, I draw for some of these experiences and also the social science training to serve as a subject matter expert within the risk COP and the natural hazard mission area. And to give you an idea of some of the things I'm working on, so I helped this year develop our theme, risk multipliers, climate change, cumulative hazards, and social vulnerabilities. So there we're trying to look at and encourage proposals that address damages, losses, impacts that are compounded by climate change, for example, stronger hurricanes or storms that are happening at the same time as sea level rise, or how that might interact with social vulnerabilities or adaptation challenges in local communities. And so in addition, we've asked proposals to include outreach and engagement strategies and sort of describe what they're going to do with communities and how communities may benefit from the proposed research and application projects. And I've also started contributing to the Hazards, Race, and Social Justice Speaker Series. So this started last year, and it has featured a variety of speakers that are in risk reduction space. For example, last month we had a presentation that focused on developing earthquake scenarios for the San Diego, Tijuana region. And this month, actually it was today, our meeting for January featured the new National Academies report on the next generation of Earth System Science and at the National Science Foundation. And another AAAS fellow in the mission area gave us an update on the national strategy for landslide loss reduction. And so now that I contribute to this, I've also been seeking out new speakers who can focus on climate justice issues. And one of my main products for the fellowship will be developing what we're calling the Strategic Approach for Equity and Inclusion in USGS Risk Research and Applications. And to create this, it's going to be sort of a plan that has guidance for leadership, as well as researchers and particularly physical scientists who might have as much training in ethics or equity or the social science methodologies that are needed to capture the local perspectives of tools or usability. And we convened a 12-person writing team from across USGS mission areas and science centers to contribute to this plan. And we have a writing workshop scheduled every month through May to get together and discuss some of these ideas and hopefully have a draft by next summer. And in addition, I'm also participating in the Science for Disaster Reduction interagency space, where I'm developing a call for information to sort of document what's happening across the interagencies in terms of equity-related projects for disaster reduction, what sort of barriers are perceived within the government, and what sort of opportunities, mechanisms, or incentives could be leveraged to foster more equity considerations in disaster science moving forward. And so I wanted to close with a question for the ESIP group. And since my background's largely qualitative and spends a lot of time in communities, understanding the local perspectives on challenges to participate in recovery processes or local government, and even recognizing those unique local adaptation contexts that high poverty rural areas might have, for example, and how that could fit with some of the modeling and big data approaches that we saw throughout the conference here that people were sharing in their presentations. And with that, I would just like to close and say thank you again for the opportunity to present. And if you want any more information about the risk community of practice, please send an email to riskyworld@usgs.gov, and we would look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt. And before we go to the next presenter, I'm wondering if you could put your question slide back up, maybe, because we're going to take a little bit of time so we don't just rush through all of the presentations at once.
That's right. So we're taking a couple minutes now to reflect on any questions that Matt asked, and also the 4 questions that are in our joint notes document, which was just pasted. Thank you, by Leslie. If you scroll down to the second page, we have 4 questions. What connections do you see to your work? What connections to other initiatives? What mechanisms for finding and sustaining collaborations did you hear about? And what other questions or comments, that's a catch-all, do you have?
All right. I'm trying to get out of here to see the questions on the screen. But yeah, the collaboration, I'm really interested in, like I said, trying to think about some of the big data approaches. And I know there's big, like an EJ screening tool and some of these mapping approaches to addressing justice. And, you know, I'll be interested in collaborating that and maybe taking some of the information that my research has been able to document by talking to people and outlining some of the local challenges for engaging local elected officials, having a seat at the table, and some of the power dynamics that go into that. And I don't know, you know, what some of the steps would be to incorporate those sort of considerations. And yeah, I would be very interested in collaborations to start exploring those ideas.
Thank you very much, Matt. So we will have this time to try to get all of our thoughts together many times during this session. Thank you for kicking us off with the first presentation, and I'll hand it over to Megan.
Yes, so we are going to pivot now to a few past and present community fellows from ESIP, and just a quick plug quickly for those of you who may not be familiar with the ESIP Community Fellows Program. It's a really wonderful program, in my opinion, for early career folks, graduate students and postdocs who are interested in bridging the gap between earth science and informatics. These are folks who are paired with an ESIP collaboration area and support their efforts for the course of 1 to 2 years. And so they are able to kind of be embedded with these groups and support them in logistical ways, but also hopefully contribute in more substantial ways. And I've totally seen them go above and beyond in doing this. Like I mentioned before, they're some of the most interesting people in our community. So really happy again to highlight them today. The first one that we'll welcome is Marion Mckenzie, who was the 2021 fellow for the ESIP Community Data Cluster. So Marion, go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Megan. And yeah, just to reiterate what Megan just said, this opportunity to be a community fellow was wonderful, and I learned so much. As we'll learn in the next few minutes, my research is completely outside of the realm of what I was doing in ESIP, but I still think that it was so beneficial in helping me become a better scientist and just a well-rounded person in thinking about these questions in collaborations. So I am a current PhD candidate at the University of Virginia, and I study glaciology, but this past year I was a cluster fellow for the Community Data Cluster. And so the mission of this cluster was to leverage ESIP to make data more discoverable, accessible, and useful to researchers, policymakers, and the public. And we did this by trying to take usable data services that are offered directly to the public in order to support communities with these data needs. And so this cluster doesn't operate under a particular sphere. We come from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different institutions. But in this case, I think that that was a strength of the cluster because of a lot of distrust of particular organizations in the community in which we were working. And so the project that this cluster was focused on was in Flint, Michigan, and looking at the water quality data that is currently available and looking at the gaps between what is available and what is needed and what is usable for that community. And so within the past year, starting with the winter meeting last year, we hosted an ideathon, which utilized the landscape analysis that was written during the summer meeting in 2020. And this ideathon spent time having us think about ways to move forward with collaborations in the community, questions that needed to be answered, and just things that we needed to consider when working in this landscape. And so after that, we developed a cluster timeline and a shareable one-pager to get the message out of what our cluster was and what we were doing with this project in Flint. And then in midsummer, our co-chair, Steve Diggs, became connected with collaborators in Flint, Michigan. So he was on the ground, met with some community leaders there, and was able to figure out what it was they didn't know and what they were looking for to get out of the water quality data that was available to them. And so we leveraged this into the summer meeting where we had a curate-a-thon. So in this working session, we had groups separate into thinking about the privacy analysis of issues that existed in the current data munging, what needed to be done there, and just future data analysis and what should be considered. And so currently we are developing a metadata maturity analysis as well as a privacy analysis, which will be formalized and then handed to our collaborators in the region. And so this is ongoing work. But at the same time, we merged with the Community Resilience Cluster. And so while we're working on these final deliverables, we are also thinking about a new direction with the Community Resilience Cluster, which Christine Gregg will comment on in her presentation. And so really pivoting here, my personal work is focused on the influence of bed properties on glacial ice dynamics. I study paleoglaciology by using remote landscape mapping, sedimentology, and geochronology to try and investigate the role of solid earth and bed properties on how ice flowed when it was across these now deglaciated landscapes to provide empirical evidence as to how these systems work in the modern ice sheets that we see today. And so one aspect of this that is beginning or has been ongoing in the field of glaciology is the concept of the connections between paleo and modern glaciology projects, because a lot of times you'll see them working discordantly. So you have your paleo projects or your modern projects. But I think what's really cool is that in certain spaces, we can begin to think about how the paleo can directly inform the modern glacial projects. And I think this is really interesting in the work I've been doing here, because there is that clear difference between relationships with communities and academia versus relationships in academia between different sectors. And so that leads to my question for the other groups. If you have experience with this, what are some differences and similarities between approaches to building connections between the people with the data and communities versus building connections between two groups that have different types of data that you want to see work concordantly? So with that, thank you for having me, and I'll hand it back to Megan.
Thank you so much, Marion. So we'll have another 2 minutes of thinking / silent Google docking in our notes document to add any questions that we might have had come to our minds, or any connections we thought of. Questions 1 through 4 in our notes doc. And then we'll move on. And feel free, if you see questions there that you want to give input on, it's also very valid to give your input as well, in addition to adding your own questions or thoughts. Leslie, are you keeping track of time? I'm not keeping track of the 2 minutes.
I am. We are at 1 minute right now, and I'm down in the document at question 4. What other questions or comments do you have? And looking at some of the things that are getting entered in there.
I definitely see some that we should for sure discuss after the presentation. All right, so let's go ahead and start to pivot to our next speaker, which will be Christine Gregg. Christine was the 2021 ESIP Community Fellow for the Community Resilience Cluster.
Thanks, Megan. I'm going to just share my screen real quick. So hi, everyone. Like Megan said, I was the Community Fellow for the Community Resilience Cluster here at ESIP last year. You may have seen the new Community Resilience Fellow, Morgan, around for the event this week. She's excellent. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of where we were last year and where we're hoping to go. And hopefully there are kind of some collaboration areas that will come to mind as I go along. All right, so the Community Resilience Cluster has this really broad goal, right? So it's enhancing community resilience through culturally meaningful improvements to data accessibility and informatics tools. One of the amazing things about ESIP allowing me to be the sort of the cluster fellow for community resilience is my background is environmental engineering, and I'm currently studying data science. So I come from that very quantitative background, and ESIP allowed me to kind of explore this more social science aspect of earth science and how it connects to communities. So one of the major things that we worked on last year was kind of developing this problem statement and really making sense of what communities need from earth science data, how they've been historically underserved by earth science data and by scientists, and what kind of challenges need to be overcome, and our recommendations for doing that. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that. I have 5 minutes, but if you're interested in having that kind of discussion, that's something that we spent a great deal of last year talking about. We've authored our problem statement where we've kind of detailed all of this. I'm sure we would be happy to share that with you if you're interested. So like I said, last year, a lot of our time was spent really ideating around the problem, reviewing the literature, but we also, as Marion said, we merged with community data, being a more, I guess, like more of an academic exercise of writing the problem statement, merging with community data. It's really kind of this excellent collaboration where we're merging with a group that has more directly worked with communities. and has that more project kind of focused experience. And then we've also done a couple of presentations to get feedback and to sort of share some of the things that we have been working on. Going forward, obviously, this is kind of a good step forward. We're looking to connect with groups that are doing work with place-based communities and really just learn about your needs, like learn about what kind of support you're looking for, what are the challenges that you've faced. Maybe you would like to engage with communities, but you just don't know how, and you're concerned about doing more harm than good. We would like to hear about all of that and how we can help kind of build capacity within our cluster to support those efforts. And then I will leave you with, I know it was supposed to be one question. I cheated and did two. So how do you or your data products engage with communities, and what support do you need to be more effective when you're collaborating with communities? Thanks. You want me to keep this up, Megan?
Yes, for the next 2 minutes while we're doing our sense making, as it's called, to think about these questions and or others in our Google Doc.
Megan, should I go ahead and try to add these to the?
Yes, that would be fabulous.
Okay.
And then folks can respond to them if they would like to. And we'll have time, like I mentioned, to talk through some of these questions after all the presentations, but we want to give you time when I'm not babbling to be thinking about what this makes you think. All right, I think I'm gonna start pivoting us. I know I didn't wait a full 2 minutes, but silence is hard to leave time for silence. All right, so I'm gonna pass it on to our next ESIP Community Fellow, Qian Wang from the ESIP Disasters Cluster. She has worked with the group both this year, or will work with the group this year, but also supported them last year. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Megan, for the intro. And I am Qian Huang, the ESIP Fellow of the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster. And I'm currently a third-year geography doctoral student working in the Hazard and Vulnerability Research Institute at the University of South Carolina. And I am also the GIS research assistant in the Center for Rural and Primary Health Care. And my research interest is on spatial and age disparity of COVID-19 outcomes, natural hazard, social vulnerability, resilience, and some like multidisciplinary work. So disaster lifecycle cluster is like tightly connected to my research interest. So the disaster lifecycle cluster's objective is to facilitate connections and coordinate efforts among data providers, managers, and developers of disaster response system, and the tools and user communities within ESIP. And what's more, we're also looking to work with other ESIP clusters to integrate best practice for data to drive decision making. And based on this purpose, the cluster chairs, Karen and Dave, came up with the ESIP ecosystem of innovation system framework and introduced it to the other clusters to show how others can plug into this process by introducing their products, their service method, and how to incorporate operational readiness ranking, the ORL model. So the ORL model is the tool that allows us to translated the operational readiness of a data set from the very technical data character to easy to understand standardized ranking. So there are 4 ranks between 1 to 4, and 1 is the highest level of operational reliability, and 4 is the lowest level. So if you are interested in the Orl model, I put some link here. So this is my 2nd year of being the IPSA fellow in the disaster lifecycle cluster, and the first IPSA meeting I attended was the last year session called California Burning, Putting Data to Work. So the disaster lifecycle cluster, we were trying to identify key trusted data needs and additional opportunities for data application in support of life-saving operations and response. And then in last year's ISAP summer meeting, we created the ecosystem of innovation I just mentioned before, and we had a session called Delivering Trusted Data to Real Users and Decision Maker. And this year, we just had our session 2 hours ago, and we discussed how trusted data can be used by communities to improve the resilience and the situation awareness for wildfire awareness, wildfire risk, and preparedness. So we invited a speaker from different ISAP clusters, including agriculture and climate, air quality, environment sensing, data readiness cluster, and information quality cluster. We also invited the executive director of Coalition and Collaboratives, Carol, and David Green, the wildfire program manager of NASA. So, so we had a very interesting discussion about how to prepare the wildfire and how can we improve the risk perception of the community. So for this year's summer meeting and the next year winter meeting, wildfire topics will be covered. So summer meeting will talk about wildfire response, and winter meeting we will talk about post-wildfire recovery and mitigation. So the wildfire project in our cluster sparked me to do some related work. For example, I've done a project about the wildfire smoke impacts on COVID-19 outcome in California. So I examined the effect of wildfire-aligned pollutant on the dynamic of confirmed cases, death, and testing of COVID-19 in California in 2020. So the line graph shows the pattern of newly confirmed cases, death per week across the state, and further compare with the air quality index. And the map shows the case rate, mortality rate, and how they're related to the wildfire smoke. A need for our cluster, as I mentioned before, our first collaboratory with the cross-domain session earlier in the afternoon, and we will have our summer meeting session and the winter meeting session talking about wildfire. So we do need ISAP cluster or other group efforts to help us discover and provide more trusted information that can drive a community-facing dashboard. So if you want to know more information or you're interested in the collaboration, please contact Karen and Dave and me, or join the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster mailing list. The link is here, and our cluster meeting is on the first Thursday of every month at 4 to 5 EST. And my question to the group is, would be how can we put the data to use and make real changes or real impacts? I put this question in the Google Doc, so feel free to put your thoughts there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I'm seeing this question 4 in our Google Doc is growing and growing. The sort of free what other questions or comments do you have? And also the what connections do you see? So that's nice to see. So I will be quiet for a minute or so and let you all add any thoughts you have there.
I am going to not be quiet and say I miss things. So can either Megan or Chen repeat which question was just posed to us?
How can we put the data to use and make real changes or impacts, which is the 4th bullet point in the doc array.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you both.
I'm seeing how long you can hold out this time, Megan.
It's not usually very long. I can't hold my breath very long either. All right, thank you for that nudge.
You're past a minute.
I will now pivot to Lindsay Barbieri, Barr, as we call her. Barr was a community fellow in the past, actually, with ESIP, but she recently graduated with her PhD, and she's working on a very special opportunity in a one-year fellowship position as ESIP's Agriculture and Climate Fellow. And Barr has a specific focus on creating cross-collaboration area connections. So we thought she'd be a great person to bring in today to have her describe some connections she's seeing emerging in ESIP and any insights she has about those. And Barr.
Perfect. Got it. Okay, let's go back, hopefully. Wonderful. Okay, can you all hear me? And I've just started my timer. We're on 5 minutes or 7?
Yeah, 7 is fine.
All right, so thank you, Megan and Leslie. I'm really excited about the session and the conversations that are coming from it because as Megan mentioned, I'm working at ESIP right now with my position is the Agriculture and Climate Information Fellow, and it's a one-year position that's really focused on thinking about cross-collaboration within ESIP and beyond ESIP, sort of focused around agriculture and climate, but that can be, really broad and connected to many different issues. So this is my look at building stronger bridges, the cross-cluster collaboration at ESIP. Now, many of you are probably pretty familiar with at least some, if not all of these collaboration areas within ESIP. We have our standing committees. We have many, many different clusters. Those highlighted in yellow are the ones I've been sort of most focused on thus far in my own work and thinking about this cross-cluster collaboration that's focused on agriculture and climate. But of course, those branches go really, really deep into all sorts of different directions when you think about the information challenges related to these topics and the connections that sort of exist inherently. So within these sort of main areas that I've been working with, these clusters I've been focused on, I wanted to highlight for this conversation sort of two main snapshots or case studies that I've been thinking about and helping support the collaborative work. So we're going to lift all those groups I've been working with up to the top and take a look at this sort of first snapshot, which Ken has already really well prepared me for, is this focus on wildfires. So a lot of different clusters, including agriculture and climate, the disaster life cycle cluster, envirosensing, have been working together and bringing in and drawing from even more of the ESIP clusters and beyond ESIP clusters to focus on this topic of wildfires. So at this ESIP meeting, we had 2 sessions fully focused on wildfires. The first in situ remotely sensed data integration for wildfire management, and the cross-domain collaboration laboratory Let's Look at Wildfires. And this is just a snapshot here, and the links at the bottom of a graph that Brian Weed, who's one of the chairs of the Ag and Climate Cluster, made, pulling all of these different focuses, all these different cluster area groups together to sort of create this knowledge graph of wildfire management and where the Ag and Climate Cluster, at least, and drawing from all these other collaboration areas have been focused. And so it's, just a quick snapshot on thinking about, pulling from all of these different collaboration areas, how do we think about this whole topic, and how can we better support the collaboration that can go into this work? So with that, I will say, from what I see from these sorts of collaboration, is that there's been really a lot of great effort and really effective work in inviting these other, all of the different clusters and collaboration areas come and work on sessions during ESIP meetings. So this has been really effective, but a lot of this effort is really concentrated at these every 6 month ESIP meetings, and sometimes momentum can be kind of hard to maintain in between these major ESIP meetings. So while that's really effective, I was asking questions like, are there good ways to maintain collaboration and work together effectively sort of beyond the ESIP meetings, and how do we maintain momentum throughout the year and really perhaps more distribute the energy and effort to work towards more collaborative outputs across these longer timescales. And with that, there's also sort of the need that I see, as I mentioned, sort of carrying forward the work and collaboration and all of this momentum between ESIP meetings. And I will also say an interesting challenge and a need is also transitioning leadership and or shifting goals of clusters within ESIP. So carrying forward work and momentum, even as leadership might change or goals might shift for the cluster. So one question I might have for other groups, clusters, or you can think of this beyond ESIP lingo and think about just sort of general collaborative working groups, is that, is your cluster work a continuation, or has there been a shift in trajectory? And if there's been a shift, how did you receive or pass on knowledge from previous leaders in your cluster? And when and how do you change the focus of a cluster? These are just some of the topics I've been thinking about as we're thinking about all this great collaborative work that's been happening and how to carry that forward. So quickly pivoting to the second, sort of the second snapshot of work that I've been supporting here at ESIP that's really exciting is focused on soil data and semantics. So this one, there's been a really great cross-cluster work between groups such as the Semantic Harmonization Cluster, the Soil Ontology and Informatics Cluster, and including folks from schema.org and the Discovery Cluster. And the Soil Ontologies and Informatics Cluster has been really focused on this upcoming year. Here on the left here, this figure is just their sort of snapshot of the schedule that they're hoping for within this coming year. So you can see February, March, April, May are full of slots of different topics and different presenters coming in. And these topics are really different semantic resources. So we have groups coming in from the schema.org group, but also from outside of ESIP, from ENVO, which is the environmental ontology, for example, or SOSA. So they have a lot of people coming in. So what I see here, is that there's a lot of sort of these envoys, if you will, sort of ambassadors, either people going into these other clusters and kind of listening in for what they're doing and then trying to bring that back to their own group, or inviting presenters in and into the cluster calls and thinking about that as sort of like going out, getting information, bringing it back to yours, or bringing people in and sharing information, which is also really effective, but it takes a lot of work and coordination. It's good at building awareness, but can be challenging potentially to work together towards outputs. And so we're thinking about, are there good ways to build collaborative outputs and work effectively without needing to just show up at increasingly and exponentially increasing meetings and calls? How do we actually think about enabling and supporting those collaborations without just needing to continue to find these other groups and listen to them and then bring that information back and sort of do that there might be better ways. Those might be the most effective ways, but that's a lot of work. So just to wrap up here, NEED I see as synthesizing and really being familiar with a lot of related and ongoing work. This is really important. There's a lot of really amazing people and efforts who might be ESIP adjacent that are working towards sort of similar goals and might have really good input that are important to bridge between. But a question would be, when do you try to bring more people into ESIP or simply keep a good dialogue between groups? And how do you really nurture and maintain relationships and that collaborative work that can happen sort of currently between and even beyond ESIP? So with that, I will leave you with these two main questions that I have from these two snapshots, which is really the first one really focusing on sort of like maintaining momentum, but also including change and transition. And then that second snapshot of sort of reaching beyond and nurturing and maintaining those relationships, potentially without just exponentially increasingly attending different and more meetings and calls. And that's, yeah, those are the questions I'll leave with.
Thank you, Lindsay. Keep those up for just a little bit longer to help people digest them, please. Megan, I think we are very close to on time, so we still have time to pause here.
Miracle. No, thanks to all of our speakers for preparing so well.
So Megan, what do you, so we're going to have a discussion now, right? We're going to leave these questions up for a little bit, and I suppose I'm supposed to pause for a minute before forging on. Okay, thanks to those of you who are typing and thinking. Megan, what do you think about sharing we can share the Google Doc up on the screen just so we can take a brief look at it together and maybe invite our panelists to find something that they found interesting and comment on it?
I might ask that we not screen share, but I love the idea. Just because without screen sharing, this looks like more of a discussion and invites folks to turn on their cameras potentially. But maybe we can still pull a few things out.
Yes.
I'm assuming it looks like we have 45 various animals in the notes document. So pretty sure everyone has it open somewhere on their screen, but just pasted it in again. Feel free to turn on your cameras if you're so inclined, but no pressure to do so. So yeah, I would just invite, maybe Leslie, want to invite each of our speakers to grab something here they might want to address and then see what the rest of the audience thinks also.
Yes, let's get started with that. So I just changed my view to grid view so I could see more people. And I know this is overwhelming. There's a lot of text and questions here, so there's no wrong choosing of which one to talk about, but maybe we can just make sure that each of our speakers has time to find something that is new to them or they want to comment on. So could we go ahead and start with Matt, if you see something there that you would
and it's
like
okay if it's the question that you came with, that's all right too.
Okay, it was the next one after mine. I was actually looking at this one about the differences and similarities between approaches for creating connections with communities as opposed to academia. And I think, some of my past research can sort of speak to that. And I think I've seen a few examples across the government too, where sort of extension or like Sea Grant type programs do make positions that are very focused on spending time in communities and building connections. And I think that's the main thing that sort of helps that, is being able to build a personal relationship. And yeah, versus academia, I know it's challenging for academia and a lot of researchers to commit to that time, because there's funding barriers and challenges, and maybe you're not rewarded or incentivized to build that relationship if you're trying to get out publications or other challenges. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, that green one that was just highlighted.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this one, or speakers or others in the audience? I think this is a really important question. It was the one I was going to highlight too. You know, how do you make connections? How much does the audience matter? The people you're trying to make connections with change your approach?
I found that this was something that came up a lot in the community data cluster, because sometimes it felt like there wasn't a lot of interest in what we were doing. And I think a lot of it came back to that transactional piece, because in academia, I feel like we do usually have those transactional collaborations where you get something out of it. Whereas a lot of times in community work, it's more altruistic. You're not getting that direct, you know, like career gain out of it in the same way that is like usually typically valued in the system of academia itself. And I think that just goes to show that there's some maybe cultural shifts that should happen and are starting to happen in order to make this work at the forefront.
Any other thoughts on this topic? I know there are some of you who are working with communities, local communities currently, who might have thoughts on this as well.
Another quick point I could say about that too is, you know, even between academia and communities and the USGS, part of what we're trying to do with that planning document that I said we're working on is think of strategies to sort of incentivize it within the USGS in the way research grade positions are structured to allow for creating those community relationships to think about it. So it's a big challenge, and I think it requires a lot of change within the organization, but hopefully we'll come up with some good ideas in this writing process over the next few months.
Thanks, Matt. How about, and sorry to call on you, but looking at our speakers, Christine, did you see a bullet point or a point that you'd like to highlight?
All right, I got to take myself off mute there. You think a bullet point of folks' comments here?
Just the question you want to address. It could be your own, or it could be someone else's.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I would just say that, like, the big question that at least the community resilience group is trying to grapple with is what everyone else needs so we can build the right capacity. I don't know.
I think a lot of the questions kind of are asking the same thing in a different way. Like, how do you make your stuff used? How do you know if you're duplicating something? How do you know if someone needs your work? So personally, I'm very overwhelmed by all of these questions and bullets here. So hopefully others do as well. It seems like every time we try to do one of these things with 90 minutes, it's like, oh, 90 minutes is not enough for this, but at least we have a lot of thoughts down here. So thanks for bringing that up. All right, you're going to be called on. So how about Chen?
Okay, so I found two comments are very interesting. And it's under question 2. So what connections do you see to other initiatives? And one is I've seen the desire for a system like ORL that I mentioned before, but sometimes it's really hard for a group to just adopt something created by another group instead of struggling through this process and creating their own customized system. I find this is really interesting yeah, it is true. Like adopt something because like different system has different emphasis. You probably emphasize like sometimes more metadata side or some like the data quality different side. So I find this one is really interesting. And another one is disaster life cycle cluster needs to articulate the right questions that as a community has regarding environmental risk, need guidance on engaging communities and addressing resilience need, prepare for disaster currently is the next wildfire. I think this is really interesting as well. So we're focused on like articulate the right question and ask the right question and then try to answer them. So identify the right question is really important. And we're trying to work on that with different clusters and with different groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
It's a really good point. Identifying the right question. I think that's something that I'm sorry if I'm going on a tangent here, but I think this is related. I find that the collaborations that have really spent a good amount of time figuring out what they're trying to answer tend to be those that are most resilient and most able to kind of get over any hurdles that they encounter because they're really clear on purpose and they're really clear with each other about what they're going after. But it can be hard to remind yourselves and to find the time to do that hard work right up front. And I see that with some ESIP clusters who are much more concrete and others who aren't.
Thank you, Megan.
Do Barr or Marion want to, maybe let's go with Marion first. She spoke first and then move on to Barr. Is that okay?
Sounds good to me. There was one question here, and this kind of goes to what Christine said, thinking about what communities need. So this question of what support do you need to more effectively collaborate with communities? This was something coming into this position that I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about. And I think the question changes or the answer changes depending on which group you're working with. But I think that's where these like collaborations among different groups that are doing this work become really important, because then you can get ideas from other places and see how that applies in your own work. So I really like this specific example that was put under this question, and I think it's a good thing to keep thinking about.
So I might jump in here. Sorry, Barr, I'm going to jump in front of you really quickly and just say, I see a really important question in this list, and it's kind of why we're here today. And I think not something we're going to solve today. It's something we hope, Barr might have some insights on, but I think the struggle will continue. Are there good ways to build collaborative outputs and work together effectively without needing to show up in exponentially increasing numbers of meetings and calls? And that's something we're really wondering about. How do you keep folks in ESIP aware of what's going on in your cluster without having to send an envoy necessarily to go and find out and come back and share? And I think that folks have mentioned some good, the ESIP Slack, the mailing list. There are ways that we can kind of try to keep each other up to speed. But yeah, this is a really important and great question.
I'd like to comment on that. This is Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
I think you have to trust. It's a trust issue. There's no way you can keep up with everything. And so you have to pick what is most relevant to you or what's most interesting to you or what jazzes you. But then also make a conscious effort to be connected to people who are connected to people. And recognize that we all have our networks, and part of the connection with other people is not just connecting to that person, but connecting to their network. And trusting that that person has got that issue covered, that you feel like you need to attend this meeting or participate in this thing, but no, I know a good person that's in that role that's doing that. I don't have to do it. And I connect with them. And that's where I think ESIP is really good because it brings all these different communities together. So I think that's just a big part of it is trusting that you can't do it all. You have to trust others to be connecting you as well.
I think it's recognizing that each of us can do anything. We just can't do everything. And trust me, I struggle with that.
Except for Megan, of course.
No. I think that works on the cluster level too, though, Bruce. Like, I think what I mentioned before about getting really clear on what's the question you're trying to answer, it also means making hard choices about who you're going to work with now and what piece of the challenge you're going to try to work on now. And being okay with that, you know, like, I'm sorry, I can't work with 7 clusters at the moment. I'm going to start here and then we'll move on.
And I struggle. I mean, I came back to ESIP 3.5 years ago, and there was all of this stuff that I wanted to get back involved with. And I think I, left some people a little bit maybe disappointed. I mean, hopefully somebody's disappointed if I'm absent. Sorry about but because I tried to get into too much and try and get back now to the question, okay, what are the things that either I really need to be at or I most want to be at? And those are hard questions because it's all good stuff.
We don't need to be at everything. We need to remind ourselves that sometimes that's hard to remember. Barr, would you like to bring another point to highlight before we do something a little bit more visual with the group?
I don't know. My head was just spinning from this discussion, which I really appreciated on that point. And I guess, I was just thinking about it from that perspective of like, you, like what Mark was saying, like you're connected to people that are connected to people, and that sort of trust and sort of maybe more deeper relationship building, I think is so, has been so great for me to see at ESIP. I feel like that's like a really amazing thing that this, that our community really does do really well. And I guess I kind of am curious about tying that to this idea of transitioning, either clusters or working group or as projects sort of transition, particularly as maybe certain people who maybe have had a lot of that time and put a lot of those, that effort into maintaining this really robust and like really beautiful network of connections, as folks, decide to leave or however that those transitions are happening. I think there's something that I've been thinking about like how do you both like kind of like celebrate the work of a working group, maybe like have the conversations of transition in whatever direction that that might look, and really pass on sort of the knowledge, if not the direct relationships and connections that exist, but like pass on that sort of like spirit of connection and that some of those relationships sort of going forward. Maybe that's like not quite an articulate question, but I'm finding myself thinking a lot about this, so would just highlight that, I guess. So,
and that's a really good question because it's not unique to ESIP clusters, but it is a facet of ESIP clusters, where we want transitioning of leadership and we want goals to evolve and we want groups to be finished and celebrated and make room for other things. And so you're right, like what a leader is passing on is not necessarily like a specific set of goals, you must do these things, but almost like a spirit of collaboration and a set of connections. And I don't know, it's different than it would be in other settings. I'm not sure if I helped to clarify that, but it's a unique challenge.
It's okay for our thoughts to not be completely clarified and coherent, but we can spend a little bit. We have another 15 minutes in this session, and Megan and I had some thoughts on how to come away with something a little bit visual and that you could all input on if you wanted to. So I'm going to attempt to screen share, and Megan, I don't know if you have the link to get to those slides so people can edit them, but let's
Yes, I will
try the screen share.
share them momentarily. And don't worry, we're not making you do any breakout rooms at the moment. We're going to try something a little different.
Yes, so our hope is that you can get into these slides and you'll be seeing them kind of in this view so you can edit if you want to. And I'm on slide 8, but we're going to be looking at slides 9, 10, and 11 for this little exercise. So on the first one, and just so you know, this will take a few minutes and you can pick and choose. You don't have to do all 3 of them, okay? The first one, you'll be able to note your level of interest with some icons. The second one, we'd like you to think about where you fit on this diagram. And it doesn't have to be precise, but if you see some groups that you've interacted with more, if you can kind of put your initials there, or we also have a little smiley face icon you can drag over there, and then draw an arrow of after what you've heard today, where you might want to go in the future. And then the third one, we will go to each of these slides to demonstrate to you before we move on, but you can describe additional bridges if you'd like to on the third one. So Megan, do you want to just say a few words about this?
First, I'm going to unmute, and then I am going to describe this first one. You'll drag one or more of the stamps that are on the bottom left there into the 4 quadrants representing the 4 speakers we had aside from Barr today. So you can indicate a number of things. You can say your levels of interest, that is. So you can say which ones you want to know more about, which ones you might want to get future updates on. And if you want to, you can say, I want to contribute. And clearly here, we're not collecting names. We're just looking to see where you fall.
Okay, and then we'll quickly demonstrate the second one, which is—
I think, actually, Leslie, I think we should linger for a second on that first one, because people have started doing it. Let's let them think.
And let us know if something's not working, like you can't drag the stuff or whatever.
Looks like it's working. So this is nice. These are like the choices you have to make when you hear about something you think is cool and what level of engagement you have available to give. Always a hard question, right? Cool. So it looks like there's interest in everything we heard about today. A good amount of like, I want to learn more.
So for that, I guess, like Matt shared a publication, a link, right? And all of these groups may have wiki pages or something that describes some of their previous work. Or what are you thinking is the best thing to get in touch with the speakers or the group leads?
See, that takes a lot of energy, right? Is it like joining a mailing list, or is it, yeah, talking to a speaker? Is it finding a publication? We're sort of brainstorming here more than giving practical answers. This might tell me as the ESIP community director, hey, I need to feature this group more in places. Maybe it would be cool to do this like across all the ESIP collaboration areas to see what we get.
All right, my screen isn't showing a lot of dragging at the moment. Should we move forward? So. Okay, so slide 10 is again the 4 groups and clusters that we've heard of, and Barr, Lindsay, she kind of spans a lot of this, but what you can do is you can either use your initials. So if you want to, you can make a text box and put your initials. I guess I should make that capital, or there's a bunch of smiley faces. You can drag one over to where you kind of think that you are approximately. So I've joined some of these calls over the years. And then you can use the Scribble tool, which I hope you can see where my mouse is up here. If you go up to the line, you can get an arrow or a line, but also there's the Scribble tool, and you can say like, oh, from what I've heard today, I think I need to kind of go around and like hear from other people and maybe end up over here. So we don't know how well this is going to work with the group editing, but it would be fun to see where you think you are now. So as I said, there's a lot of things you can drag over here, and then where do you think you could possibly go?
And this is really, we're trying something new. So this is, we acknowledge this is a little abstract, and maybe you don't fall really all that close to any of these groups. That's okay too.
What would we be doing if we were in person, Megan? Would we have this up on
have some of
a
those
piece of paper?
like flip charts, I don't know, whiteboards,
You know,
or we tell people to go to corners of the room. I don't know. I'm
Well, this is just like you said, Megan. Some people are kind of like on the periphery now, and they're trying to get into the groups.
well, in this, you know, the reality is we should have so many more groups on here. And I think, you know, everybody wants to be able to keep up with or do everything. It's hard to make these choices. So I think that's what we're demonstrating here.
What we're demonstrating is that it is difficult to do a group virtual activity, but it can still be fun to watch.
I think it's good to stretch your mind in different ways. It's okay. I think this is not a bad outcome. All right. So maybe you all can continue working on that slide. And again, we're not keeping track of anything here. So this is not how the connections are actually being made. We're just looking at where you seem to think you fall in this ecosystem. So for this one, this is much more traditional looking. Tell us about any other related efforts or connections you think should be made to this group today. We sort of had a question about this in the notes doc, but if there are any other nuggets you want to drop, things you think these folks should be aware of, please go ahead and add them here. Could be people, could be organizations, could be tools, could be topics. There are no wrong answers on any of these slides.
Oops, I did not do that on purpose. And also, we know that some of this might be in the Google Doc, which is just fine.
Yeah.
It's kind of more fun to be looking at this.
Isn't it? All right. Leslie, do we dare do like a thumbs up if you had fun drawing on our slides? I'm kind of curious.
How would we even do that?
How we could, well, they can give thumbs up, they can't give thumbs down. That's the best part.
Okay. Okay, so Zoom thumbs up, you're saying. Go to your little bar where it says reactions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think this is just brainstorming here, but we haven't found the best ways to ask these questions, but I think being willing to like go off the rails a little bit can make a collaboration better. And so we'll try to keep thinking about these things, and we hope that you all will too, and we can still exchange not just specific ways that we can work together, but techniques that help us. All right, so it's time to wrap up. Thank you all for being here today. We took some time today to explore and to think about some connections. We had a very specific exchange between a very specific group of people, and we thought about some potential connections for the future. Barr's example told us about a focused effort toward building stronger bridges. The reality, I think, that we all know is that this takes time. And I think something that Leslie and I were thinking about is we really do need to slow down and ask ourselves these questions more often. What's meaningful to us, and make real choices before we embark on collaborations, or even say, like, I want to get involved. As community managers, Leslie and I will continue to try to create opportunities for finding connections like this, and we'll continue to look for the best tools and resources. And I really loved what Mark said earlier about, like, building the trust that's needed, to make these hard choices about where you'll give your greatest level of engagement and where you'll trust others to take the lead. There's still no substitute for conversations like the ones we had today. And these conversations, they really help us to get over hurdles to beginning and sustaining collaboration. So we look forward to having a lot more conversations like this one today. We also captured a lot of information in our various documents. If you want to follow up on any of these, definitely get in touch with us.
Okay, I think we did it, Megan. We have a connection. And also to say, we saw this happening all throughout the rest of the ESIP meeting sessions as well. It seems to be taking on a life of its own where different clusters are getting together. So good job. Keep it up.
Yeah, and that's the challenge is fostering that, but making sure our leaders don't get so tired. That's what we're trying to stay ahead of, is keeping them from getting so tired trying to make those things happen. So thank you so much to all of our speakers, by the way. You were awesome.
Thanks for sharing your work and your info with us.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I just want to say that also I feel like Megan and Leslie are really amazing examples of the cross group collaboration and fun that can happen. So I really appreciate it.
Leslie and I are thinking of starting a podcast. I think that would be a lot of work, but I think it'd be really fun.
That has not been discussed for years.
It's in the back pocket.
Thanks for everyone's support.
And thank you, Charlie, also for helping us think through this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all around.
Bye.
See you.